Alrighty, hello everybody. Welcome to the study today of Ecclesiastes. Right now we have Spencer and Jared, and we are going to go through the book of Ecclesiastes. And we're going to start with an introduction to the author, when it was written, and why this book was written. I don't want to make this a study that's thematic, I think is the word. It's going to be like verse by verse, systematic, and I'm going to jump around a little bit to some cross references. And if you guys have any questions at any time, feel free to raise your hand or just ask. It's going to be very laid back. But let's get started. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. I apologize if you guys were expecting a more decorated presentation.
Oh, that's beautiful.
But we're just gonna get focused on the text and try to get a better understanding of the book of Ecclesiastes. Do you guys have a note-taking system, like a notebook or a digital notes app?
I was gonna just type the notes in my phone, but I also have my Bible in front of me. So worst case scenario, I can write down some things in it, or like I say, just type in my phone. So
don't feel bad about writing in your Bible. I know
some people do a little bit.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it helps me a lot. I know that there's a whole connotation around it being a holy book, and in some cultures people don't like to mess that up. But to me, I think it's not the actual book that's holy. It's like the text that is I guess, for lack of a better word, sacred. And something that helps me understand it better is having notes and highlighters. And one of my goals is to go through my whole Bible and have have it all highlighted, and maybe everything, some annotations in every page. That's going to take a long time though, because the Bible it's a lot of books. Yeah. But let's get started. Ecclesiastes. Hold on a second. Oh, there we go. All right, so this book was written according to the Bible by a guy whose name was King Solomon. And in the book, he identifies himself as the preacher, son of King David. He doesn't say he's Solomon, but we infer from that title, son of King David, and from a lot of other clues in the text that it was indeed King Solomon. And if it is so, then the book would have been written during the time of his reign, which was from 970 BC to about 930 BC. And from the clues, we can kind of see that this is a book that was written later in his life, when he is a lot older and has a lot more experiences to reflect on. However, there is an alternative date for this book that is given by biblical scholarship. It's kind of like the secular way of studying the Bible, which is very interesting to study. But today we're going to follow the conventional authorship and date of this book, which would have been around 935 BC, so 3,000 years ago, which is a long time ago. And you might say, that's like outdated. It's not gonna, be relevant to today's time. Things have changed so much. But it's surprising that one of the key lines in this book is that there's nothing new under the sun. So, and everything, in this realm, in this earth, it's just a repetition. There's nothing new, and that's kind of something we see when we study history. One of the key phrases that they say is that man learns nothing from history, or history. What's the phrase? You guys know what I'm talking about? It's like history. If you don't study history, you're bound to repeat it, and generally that's what happens. History repeats itself. But this book, I will warn you, it seems very pessimistic. It almost makes you feel depressed based on the perspective that this author is giving. But I think it is worth studying. It's going to give you guys the purpose of the book for me is that it allows us to reflect on the inevitable, I guess, unsatisfaction that happens when we try to find happiness in things of this world, things that are temporary. And the conclusion helps us to have a better understanding of what is really important in life. So it's it's one of those classical topics to talk about in philosophy. What's the point of life? That's what this book talks about. And as we're going to see today we're going to introduce, who was Solomon, what was his life, what was his experience, and then maybe a few verses. That's what we're going to try to get through today, maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes. But we're going to see that Solomon was somebody who had like a lot of experiences. He didn't deny himself anything because he had that capacity. He was very wealthy. And at the same time, he was given a lot of wisdom. But that wisdom didn't save him from making a lot of mistakes. However, now that he's writing from the perspective of later in his life, he can see things with a clearer eye, with a higher perspective, and he can give us, what is his final conclusion as to what matters in life. So, any questions before we get started with Solomon's life? Nice. Oh, Jared, what's that face that's behind you?
That's Tim Tebow.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, so I don't know why it's blurred, but basically it says along the way there's going to be a lot of obstacles, a lot of adversity, a lot of people who will tell you you're not good enough, and then it says I'm here to tell you you are. And it's like a quote of his, and that's right over top of me when I go to sleep every night. So
that's awesome.
Yeah,
nice.
That's been up there for several years, and I kind of forget it's there, but I noticed on the camera it was kind of showing his face a little bit. So
yeah, I thought that was funny. Like the blurring effect covered everything,
right.
But those two faces.
Right.
But that's a cool quote. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Let's so here I have some links to some chapter of, or a few chapters of the book of Kings, which is a book that's a little earlier in the Old Testament. All the books that we're talking about today are in the Old Testament of the Bible. And we're looking at the book of First Kings. And before I go into that, I want to talk a little about Solomon and Israel. So Israel was a kingdom, a monarchy that existed around the time of Solomon, like 3,000 to 3,200 years ago. At first, they were just like tribes that inhabited a land. They were descendants of somebody who was very famous. His name is Abraham. But eventually, they get to a promised land. They multiplied a lot, and they wanted to have a king like a lot of the nations that existed around them, a lot of the empires that were arising, the Egyptian Empire, the Babylonians, and all the little ones too. And the first king that they had was King Saul. And after him, it was King David, and then after him, it was King Solomon. So Solomon was the third king of Israel. After his life, once he died, his son was given the reign, King Rehoboam, and because of him managing the kingdom poorly, he had the opportunity to either listen to the advice of the wiser, older counselors that he had, or his friends, and he went with his friends, and that caused him to divide the kingdom. Um, and it's very sad. But from there on, the two kingdoms kind of had their division, and there's a whole story that goes from there. But one kingdom uh, kept its identity, and that's the people who now we know as Jewish people. They come from the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah. So it's kind of crazy that those people have remained for thousands of years, and they keep the same identity, the same values and culture. And from that people group came Jesus, the guy who started the world's largest religion, which is Christianity. And so that's a context. So technically, Jesus was a descendant of Solomon. Descendant of Solomon. So Solomon was great grandfather of Jesus. All right, and he reigned, like we said earlier, from 970 to 930 BC. And as we're going to read today, there's 3 sections I wanted to cover. He was very wise, and we'll see in the first section. He was very wealthy, and he let all that get to his head, and that led to a fall. And that's what we're going to read today. I'm going to ask you guys to help me too. So if you have your Bibles, you could read from there, or I'm going to click on this link. And do you guys see the page? Or is it still the same screen?
No, we see the presentation still.
Okay. My bad. 1 second. Where are we? There we go. How about now?
Nothing. Oh, there it goes.
Yep.
Yes. All right. First Kings 4:21 to 34. Spencer, could you help me with this portion of the text?
Yeah. So Solomon reigned over all kingdoms from the river to the lands of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Now Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour, 60 cores of meal, 10 fatted oxen, 20 oxen from the pastures, and 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fatted fowl. For he had dominion over all the region on this side of the river from Tipsah even to Gaza, namely over all the kings on this side of the river. And he had peace on every side all around him. And Judah and
Pause right
Israel.
there for a little bit.
Oh, pause. Okay.
Yes, thank you. So a little bit more context. This is when Solomon was just starting his reign as king of Israel, and his dad, King David, had basically during his whole life had always had war going on, and so he was always conquering, always having battles, and the Lord was with him, so he was victorious, and he conquered a large territory. So all these territories were giving a tithe, I think, or provision, it says, to Solomon. And a core, I had it written down, I think it's a unit of like liquid volume. So in liters,
It's about 231 cubic feet.
Yeah. 230 liters, which is cubic feet. Yeah, cubic feet. No, I've got my units. I gotta go. I got my units messed up. I have to go back to school. But here I have it written down that 30 cores is 6,900 liters, which might be around that. So I don't know how big that is for reference. It's probably big enough to like fill a pool, and that's just of flour. So imagine that's how much he's getting every day from all the regions around him that are basically like paying taxes to him. And not only that, but also 60 cores of meal. I'm not sure what that is, but that's twice the amount in meal. And then
Like corn.
Yeah, probably cornmeal. So you can see there's a lot of prosperity going on. And it says that he reigned from the region on this side of the river from Tipsah to Gaza. And Gaza is what we know today as the Gaza Strip, that region that's governed by Hamas, the Palestinians. That there's a lot of conflict there. So through most of Israel's history, that region was always causing a lot of conflict. That was the territory of the Philistines, like it said earlier. And David was the only king to beat the Philistines, to defeat the Philistines. And so when Solomon was king, he was getting tribute from them. But you can see even now that there's that same conflict existing between Jews, Judah, and Philistines or Palestinians. All right, sorry, Spencer, you can keep going. Verse 26, I think, right?
I think 25. But yeah, so and Judah and Israel dwelt safely, each man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan as far as Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. And these governors, each man in his month, provided food for King Solomon and for all who came to King Solomon's table. There was no lack in their supply. They also brought barley and straw to the proper place for the horses and steeds, each man according to his charge. And God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding and largeness of heart, like the sand on the seashore. Thus Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the men of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, Charcoal, and Darda, the sons of Mahal, and his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. Also, he spoke of trees, from the cedar tree of Lebanon even to the hyssop that springs out of the wall. He spoke also of animals, of birds, of creeping things, and of fish. And men of all nations, from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom, came to hear the wisdom of Solomon.
Nice. Thank you, Spencer. And so now we see here, Solomon, he was very, very wise, and he was admired by a lot of people. And he's almost like a modern day biologist. Also, he liked to study nature, trees, and animals. The cedar tree that I mentioned here, that's the tree that he made a treaty with King Haman of the Edomites, and that's the tree that was cut down to build the temple, the famous temple in Israel. Solomon was built the first temple, which was destroyed by the Babylonians when they conquered Israel like 300 years later. And then there was a second temple that was built. That one was destroyed by the Romans. But Lebanon, the cedar trees of Lebanon was the wood that was used for that temple. But yeah, he was, as you can see, he was a very, very smart and wise guy for his age. He was very young. I don't know how young at the time of when he started reigning, but he had a lot of admiration. All right, next text.
So, can I ask something really quickly?
Yeah.
So in the text, it kind of just says that he was given the wisdom. Is there any like other context that you might have as far as like how he actually, like, was he just like scholarly? Was he just smart as he grew up? Or because all it says is, and God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding. So like, I don't know. I guess I'm just asking more about like context behind that and like how that came to be.
Yeah.
If he was studying a lot and just learned, or if he was just gifted. Like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but
No, that makes sense. That's a really good question. There is God appeared to Solomon on two occasions, it says in the Bible. One was when he was very young and he wasn't king yet. But basically, it's very interesting. God, I don't know how he communicated to him, but it says that God asked Solomon if he could ask for anything, what would it be? Kind of like a genie. And most people would ask for, another wish,
material things,
wealth, greed, something related to greed. but Solomon responded in a way that pleased God, and he said, I need more wisdom, which is something that is a word that's very important in the Bible. It refers to understanding of God's commandments, God's instructions. It says somewhere in the first 5 books of the Bible, which is referred to as the Torah or the Pentateuch, that God's commandments give our wisdom and understanding. And in the book of Proverbs, which contain probably the 3,000 Proverbs that it mentions here, there's this constant theme of seek wisdom, seek understanding. Wisdom is, I think, something that there's different kinds of wisdom, but I think typically when the Bible talks about wisdom, it's wisdom that comes from above. It's like spiritual wisdom. But you can also see that Solomon was I think it's kind of implied that he was very gifted and that he was very smart. He would study things, and he was just very, very blessed in that regards with his intelligence. But that's a really good question.
Thank you.
Alrighty, let's go to the next portion. Let me see. Let me know if you guys can see this. Did a new page pop up?
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay. Jared, could you help us with reading this portion?
Sure. So the weight of gold that came to Solomon yearly was 666 talents of gold. Besides that, from the traveling merchants, from the income of traders, from all the kings of Arabia, and from the governors of the country. And King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. He also made 300 shields of hammered gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield. The king put them into the house of the forest of Lebanon. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round at the back. There were armrests on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the armrests. 12 lions stood there, 1 on each side of the 6 steps. Nothing like this had been made for any other kingdom.
1 second, Jared. I'm gonna grab my charger real quick. My computer's low on battery.
Shoot, the list was kind of throwing me for a loop. I didn't read that very fluidly, but
no, that was great, man. One thing I wanted to point out is that I was looking up what is a talent. It mentions he was getting 666 talents of gold yearly, and it's like a measure that has a lot of different. It's a measure of mass. It's got a lot of different. It's a range from around 66 pounds to 120 pounds, and so I was calculating based on what the price of gold is today. What is like the minimum amount that would equate to today, and that would have been more than $1 billion a year. But he was a billionaire. He was in the range, maybe not quite as wealthy as Elon Musk, because that guy, he got really wealthy this year, but definitely one of the wealthiest men and most powerful men in his time. And it wasn't just the 666 talents of gold, but also other goods that he was getting. But it's interesting to me that it's 666, which some people know as like the mark of the beast.
yeah.
But it's simply 6 is the number of in the Bible. Numbers have a significance. 6 is the number of man, and so it's kind of maybe a hint at that Solomon was becoming very materialistic.
Right.
And yeah, we're going to see a little bit how that played out. But it also mentions that his throne was made of ivory and that he had like 12 lions on all of the steps leading up to it. And those represented the 12 tribes of Israel, of his unified kingdom, which would later divide into a kingdom of 2, a kingdom of Judah, and a kingdom of 10. the kingdom of Israel. Verse 21.
Right. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Not one was silver, for this was accounted as nothing in the days of Solomon. For the king had merchant ships at sea with the fleet of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the merchant ships came bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and monkeys. So King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. Now all the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. Each man brought his present, articles of silver and gold, garments, armor, spices, horses, and mules at a set rate year by year. And Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedar trees as abundant as the sycamores which are in the lowland. Also Solomon had horses imported from Egypt and Kive. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah.
The king's merchants bought them in Kiva at the current price.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So he was so wealthy, that silver was like, it meant nothing. It was as much as stones in his time. And then the other thing that it says is that he was gathering chariots and horsemen, which in that time was the most advanced, not just any, horses from Egypt, which was well known for having very, very powerful armies built of horses and chariots. And so he was gathering up a very advanced army. It's kind of like similar to how today the U.S. has really strong defense, and they have jets, fighters, and bombers, and all the most advanced, technology. It's kind of what Solomon was doing. The interesting thing is that in the book of Deuteronomy, which is part of the book of the 5 books of the Torah, the instruction from God, there's a section that gives commandments for kings, even though they weren't a thing in Israel at that time. But it said, don't accumulate gold, don't accumulate horses and chariots, and don't accumulate many wives. And that's exactly what Solomon did. And so he was disobeying, the commands for a king. And even though he was very wise, and he built the first temple for God, which was something that even King David wanted to do. It was beautiful. I was reading the other chapters before this one in Kings of how the temple was built and the way that Solomon dedicated it. I was like, wow, this guy really, really has a really close relationship with God, and he's very righteous. But then his life just completely changed because of all the material things he accumulated. And then we get to the last portion. I'm going to pull it up, which is these verses right here. Spencer, could you help us with these?
Starting from the beginning. Okay. But King Solomon loved many foreign women, as was the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. For it was so, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord and did not fully follow the Lord, as did his father David. Then Solomon built a high place for Shemoth, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. And he did likewise for all his foreign wives who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. So the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned from the Lord God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this and have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away the whole kingdom. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Spencer.
No problem.
Whoa, they said David so many times. I got it. Oh, my bad. But Solomon, the first wife he had, which I think he had just one wife for a long time, was the daughter of Pharaoh. He made a treaty with the Pharaoh of Egypt, and that's how he had all those horses. But after he accumulated all this wealth and all this influence, he started marrying women left and right, and not just any woman. He was marrying like royal women, women who were the daughters of kings and their princesses. So he had, the most beautiful woman probably in that time. Every night, one woman every night. It's kind of crazy. I don't know how having 700 wives is possible. But I guess with Solomon, it's kind of everything is exaggerated. But the sad thing is that all his wives were not people who feared God. They weren't Israelites. They were women from other places who worshipped false gods. And Solomon, in order to please his wives, he dedicated a temple. He allowed their wives to build a temple for all their gods. And imagine all the temples that were in Israel that were for false gods. And as it says in verse 9, the Lord became angry with Solomon, and he started having a lot of problems after this, which we're not going to cover. But the big conclusion is that Solomon was going to lose the kingdom. The kingdom was going to be torn apart and given to your servant, which is a guy whose name was Jeroboam. But he wasn't going to do it in the days of Solomon. He was going to do it when his son became king. It was King Rehoboam. And like I said, he's not going to give him the whole kingdom. He's not going to take away the whole kingdom. He's going to give him one tribe, which is the tribe of Benjamin. So it was Judah and Benjamin, which formed the kingdom of Judah. And then the other 10 tribes formed the other kingdom. All right, so that's the life of Solomon. And you can imagine, I think based on this book, he eventually, at the end of his days, he repented from all his sins. Because if you walk through Ecclesiastes to the end, the conclusion is the only thing that matters are things that are not of this world, things that are spiritual. And that's what we're going to start talking about. Any questions and comments? What did you guys think?
I noticed it said in there, like back to like Jared's original question, that God put the wisdom in his heart. So maybe God just gave him all that wisdom, and he didn't have to study. Is what I think happened, low key. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. It was kind of like how God gave Samson like a lot of strength in the book of Judges, something maybe even supernatural. Yeah.
Yeah, he did a lot of supernatural things, in history.
Yeah. But that was Solomon's life. And so that's the guy that we're going to learn from today. Now we're going to see the side of him that's like, man, he's old, can't to all the things he used to do, and now he's reflecting on what really matters in life. So quite the resume. All right, Book of Ecclesiastes. I'm going to break it up into 4 sections just to have a better understanding of the flow of the book. It's 12 chapters. The first 11 verses of the first chapter, I think I see as his introduction, his questions, questions about the meaning of life. And that's what we're going to try to knock out today. And then from there, the next 6 chapters is Solomon's experiences. He's going to go through all the things that he tried in his life, one by one, and give an investigation of all those things. And then he's going to have conclusions for all those things and start talking about what really is important in life. And then he's going to have his final words, his final advice in the last few verses of the 12th chapter. All right, so let's get started. Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verse 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? So as we mentioned earlier, the author of the book doesn't present himself by his name, but rather he gives himself this title, that's preacher. And preacher in Hebrew is the word kohelet, and that word comes from the word koel, which I have here, and that word means to gather. So somebody who's a preacher is somebody who gathers a lot of experiences in order to deliver them. So he's at a point in his life when he wants to teach. I think throughout a lot of his life, he was teaching. Maybe in the earlier parts of his life when he was close to God, and he wrote the book of Proverbs and the book of Song of Songs. That's when he was also, in this mode of teaching. But now he's teaching from a perspective of having tried everything, having experienced everything that this world has to offer. The word vanity is a word habel in Hebrew, which means empty or unsatisfactory. And when in the Hebrew, vanity of vanities is it's an expression similar to the phrase "Holy of Holies," "King of Kings," "Song of Songs." It's a way of saying that this is the climax, the highest level of something. So the vanity of vanities is the thing that is the most unsatisfactory, the most empty thing that you can think of. And so vanity of vanities, says the picture, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, which can seem very pessimistic. But then he makes the question that is probably the most asked question by mankind, which is basically, what is the point of life? What's the point of all of this? What profit has man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? So right away we see that this has a very depressing outlook of life. But I assure you guys that this book is worth studying. There's an important principle in this book that I read one time. It's called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the habit that I'm referring to simply is begin with the end in mind. In other words, before you climb the ladder, whatever you want to climb, ladder of success, make sure that you put the ladder on the right building. Otherwise, when you get to the top of the building, you may be very disappointed, which is something that often happens, I think. And so this book is going to help us to analyze all the paths that the world has to offer, and from the perspective of a man who lived it, who tried everything. And the result is that we're going to have a better vision to dedicate our lives now that we're younger to something that really matters and that's going to satisfy us at the end of our lives. So that's why I think it's a worthwhile investment to study this book, even though it makes life seem a little bit sad. There is a happy ending. So now Solomon is going to start describing What are the things in this life that are wasting time? And not to say that like pursuing wealth is a waste of time, or that studying is a waste of time, but that they shouldn't be the centerpiece of what we desire in our hearts. They shouldn't be the thing we desire the most. But I think that the main point is that there should be a balance. So, there's a balance to everything. It's not good to have too extreme of a view. All right, verse 4 through 6. One generation passes away, and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. The sun also rises, and the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it arose. The wind goes toward the south and turns around to the north. The wind whirls about continually and comes again on its circuit. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, there they return again. All things are full of labor, man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, or the ear filled with hearing. And so Solomon, in his wisdom, observes that life is monotonous. Solomon, who we learned earlier, liked to study nature and had an advanced understanding of biology, of science for his time. He observed that even in nature, there's a lot of cyclical processes. So in this repetitive environment, Solomon observes that mankind is insatiable. They're hard. It's hard for us to be satisfied. There's a hole in our being that we want to fill, and it's this repetitive and exhausting state of humanity that it actually originates in Genesis, the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, chapter 3, in the famous fall of Adam and Eve, when they ate the forbidden fruit. God said to Adam in verse 17 of chapter 3, to Adam he said, because you listened to your wife and ate from the fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. I will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return. And so you even see that same repetitive principle. We start out our lives from dust, from organic compounds, and that's all we're going to become in the end of our lives, is dust. So because of the fall of man, that's when this repetitiveness of life and nature began. We have to work for food, for basic needs of survival. Nothing is handed to us. We have to work, and it's exhausting. It's repetitive. And there's nothing. It seems like we're going around in circles. I don't know. Is that kind of the outlook that you guys have ever observed in life? What do you guys think?
I've thought about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, especially now that all of us are right, we're all graduated and out of college. Well, aside from Spencer, you're basically there. I mean, you were.
Yeah.
Starting
his own company.
Yeah. Well, that too. Yeah, but we all have like a routine, right, that we go through, and it's very repetitive, and the point of that is kind of like you were saying, it's to basically like survive and sustain what like the life that we're currently living, and then also for the future as well. But yeah, I feel the same way ever since not depending on my parents anymore. I have to provide for me, for my family, for my new family, and everything just seems so a drag. It's just too much work. But that's just how it's been for since
the fall of man, according to the Bible. All right, last few verses that we're going to cover today. Verse 9, that which has been that which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after. And everything is repetitive. And this principle can make us feel sad, can make us feel depressed. But the key phrase is, there's nothing new under the sun. Under the sun represents the things that are in the world, things that are materialistic. However, the things that are, the other perspective is the things that are above the sun. And that's what represents spiritual life, spiritual things. And there's something inside of us as human beings that consistently, I think, through time leads us to seek a higher purpose, to seek something above this world, above the sun, and something that's bigger than ourselves, something that's outside of this world. Generally, because we're not generally, when people get older, they find that there's a big unsatisfaction with things of the world. And so this is a hint as to what is really important in life, what really matters, what's really going to give us lasting, meaningful satisfaction. And as it says, there's everything has already been. There's nothing new. So everything that will happen, something that has happened in the past. And it's like that phrase that we mentioned earlier, that history, if you don't study it, is bound to be repeated. That's a cycle that kind of has not been escaped. History teaches us that man learns nothing from history. And so that is the introduction to Ecclesiastes, to this topic about questioning what is the point of everything. What is the profit that man gets from all his toil, all his work under the sun? And that's what we're going to learn, hopefully by the end of the book. Still have a long ways to go, but we are right on time. Thank you, everybody. And I'll cut off the recording.